in South Philadelphia off of Packer Avenue. Behind me is the neighborhood of jailed mob boss Joseph Uncle Joe Legambi. Legambi and most of his top associates are being held without bail on a racketeering gambling indictment that was handed up about a week and a half ago. Now the question is, who fills the vacuum with Legambi and the others in jail? There's no doubt somebody will try to fill that vacuum, and the primary reason is money. This indictment is an economic indictment built around the traditional sources of income for the mob: sports betting, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and video poker machines. And with Legambi and his friends in jail, that economy does not stop. Loan shark debtors still have to pay their weekly vig. The video poker machines still deliver income every week. Sports betting, while it slows down in the summer, is still a viable economic engine in organized crime. A lot of speculation about Joseph Skinny Joe Merlino, the former mob boss, who's in a halfway house in Florida. Merlino has told friends and associates he has no intention of coming back to Philadelphia. But there are those in the underworld and those in law enforcement who believe Skinny Joey will run the family from Florida using proxies, using friends, using top associates. According to sources, Merlino has tapped Stevie Mazzone, who was his underboss, to take over the crime family up here. John Ciancaglini will remain a player. Mazzone, when he was on supervised release, was working in a fitness center in South Philadelphia. It's unclear what he's doing now, but he's driving around town in a nice car, seems to be reasserting his position in the underworld. John Ciancaglini is also doing very well. He's off supervised release. He, most days, operates a newsstand in the parking lot of the Chicky and Pete's restaurant here on Packer Avenue. It's a newsstand kiosk owned by his wife, Kathy, but most days you can find Johnny Chang there. Both Mazzone and Ciancaglini are experienced in the ways of the underworld, and both figure to be players as this new structure takes shape. And speculation is the money that was coming into the Legambi organization will now be funneled through Mazzone and perhaps Ciancaglini to Merlino. It's just a shift in power. There's a certain irony in all of this because Legambi became the boss back in 1999 after Merlino, Ciancaglini, Mazzone, and several others were indicted and jailed. So we've kind of come full circle if in fact that's the way it played out. The other interesting thing is the last time Joey Merlino took over as boss in the Philadelphia underworld was in 1995. He had been engaged in a war, his faction, with another faction headed by mob boss John Stanfa. The Merlino faction didn't win the war, but they took over by default after the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office indicted Stanfa and most of his top associates. That ended Stanfa's reign as mob boss, created a vacuum. Merlino and his associates, according to authorities, moved to fill that vacuum. Now here we are, almost 2 decades later. Joe Legambi and his associates have been indicted, a new power vacuum has been created, and the conventional wisdom on the streets here in South Philadelphia is Merlino and his associates will move again to fill that vacuum. There is, however, one wild card in all of this. Back in the 1980s, when Nicky Scarfa was the mob boss, he and about 20 of his top associates were convicted of racketeering murder charges. At least a half dozen of those defendants served more than 20 years in jail and are now back on the streets, either here in South Philadelphia or in South Jersey. Those individuals who have basically stayed in the shadows have status in the underworld if they want to use that. They did their time. They spent a lot of time in jail. They paid their dues. And if those individuals want to resurface and say, hey, we're entitled to a piece of the action, in underworld terms, that's a legitimate argument. So what remains to be seen as this plays out is who becomes the top dog in Philadelphia, who shares the wealth, or is there conflict over an attempt to grab that wealth? It's all about money, it's all about who's making the collections, and it's all about in whose pocket that money goes. Skinny Joey Merlino from Florida could run the operation, and if that's the case, you can be sure someone will be making regular trips down to the Sunshine State with an envelope filled with cash.